The wind swept across the barren plains, carrying with it the dust of judgment and whispers from the small town of Redwood. In a creaky old farmhouse on the edge of town, a young girl stood trembling before her stepfather, her hands pressed tightly against her faded dress as though she could somehow hide the truth that the whole town already knew. The faint swell beneath her ribs told a story she wished she could erase, a story she had never chosen. Her stepfather's face was red with fury, eyes burning with a kind of pride that turned cruel when bruised. The girl's mother had been gone nearly 2 winters now, leaving her alone in a home that had grown colder with every passing day. The man who had promised to protect her stood now as her accuser, his words striking harder than any hand could. "You brought shame to this house," he thundered, slamming his palm on the table so hard that the old lantern rattled. "You've ruined everything I've worked for. People will whisper my name in disgust because of you." His voice carried the weight of his own broken pride, more concerned with what the town would say than the truth that lay trembling before him. The girl's lips quivered, her voice barely a whisper. "It wasn't my fault," she managed to say, but the words dissolved in the air before they could reach him. He didn't want to hear. He didn't want to believe. Shame had blinded him. In a drunken rage, he grabbed her by the arm and dragged her outside, the screen door slamming behind them. The dawn light was pale and cruel, shining over the dirt road where her bare feet stumbled. "You don't belong here anymore," he shouted, tossing her small bundle of belongings at her feet. "You're no daughter of mine. Go on. Take your sin and get out of my sight." The words echoed through the morning stillness, cruel and final. Then he turned his back and slammed the door shut, leaving her standing in the dust alone. She stood there for a long moment, the world spinning in a blur of heartbreak and disbelief. The weight of rejection pressed down harder than the child she carried. Slowly she began to walk. The road stretched endlessly, the prairie wind stinging her face as tears fell silently down her cheeks. She passed the church where the townsfolk would soon gather, whispering about her like she was a warning rather than a wounded soul. Every step felt heavier than the last, but she kept moving, because stopping meant surrender, and something inside her refused to die that easily. By sunset, the cold began to creep in. She found herself near an abandoned barn, its roof half collapsed, the wooden beams gray with age. She crawled inside, trembling, wrapping her thin shawl tight around her shoulders. The faint cry of a coyote in the distance reminded her how alone she was. She closed her eyes and prayed, not for herself but for the small heartbeat within her. Morning came quietly. The light peeked through the broken boards of the barn, and with it came the sound of hooves. A horse slowed to a stop outside, and a shadow fell across the doorway. A tall stranger dismounted, a man with calm eyes, broad shoulders, and a quiet strength in the way he moved. He looked down at her, half-conscious in the hay, her face pale and tear-streaked. Without a word, he removed his coat and draped it over her. She flinched, expecting anger or judgment, but instead heard the gentlest voice she'd ever known. "You're safe now," he said softly. When she tried to speak, he raised a hand to stop her. "Don't talk. You need rest," he murmured, fetching water from his saddlebag. His kindness was unfamiliar, almost painful in its sincerity. For the first time in months, she didn't feel like a burden. The stranger stayed with her until she could sit up, then offered her food, his voice calm but firm. "No one deserves to be left out here alone," he said. Word of the stranger spread fast. Redwood was the kind of place where every new face stirred curiosity, especially one who seemed to care for someone the town had already condemned. When the stepfather heard the news that his disgrace had been seen alive and cared for by a passing man, his pride turned to fury. "He's meddling in my affairs," he growled, slamming his whiskey bottle down. "He'll regret stepping into my family business." But the stranger wasn't the type to be intimidated. A few days later, he rode into town, leading his horse by the reins. The entire main street went quiet. Men stopped working. Women peeked from behind curtains. The stranger walked straight to the saloon where the stepfather sat nursing his drink. "You're John Jameson?" the stranger asked, his tone steady. Jameson sneered. "Who's asking?" The stranger didn't answer immediately. He just stood there for a long moment, eyes fixed on the man who'd cast away an innocent girl to preserve his own reputation. Then, without raising his voice, he said, "I'm the man who found the person you left to die in the dirt." The saloon went dead silent. Jameson's face turned pale beneath the heat of those words. "I don't know who you think you are, Jameson barked, trying to stand tall, but the stranger took one slow step closer. I'm someone who knows what it means to protect life, he said. You call yourself a man, but you turned your back on the weakest soul under your roof. That's not manhood, that's cowardice. The room was frozen. Jameson's pride cracked like thin ice. He reached for his pistol, but the stranger was faster. His hand darted out, knocking the weapon away, sending it clattering across the floor. The stranger didn't draw his own gun. Instead, he stared Jameson down until the older man dropped his gaze, shame flooding his face. You can't hide from what you did, the stranger said. But you can choose to make it right. Go to her. Look her in the eyes and maybe, just maybe, you'll find the part of yourself you lost when you threw her away. The stranger turned and walked out into the sunlight, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than any fight could have. Later that evening, Jameson rode out to the old barn, guilt eating him alive. When he found her sitting quietly by the fire, still weak but alive, he couldn't speak. She didn't look up at first. Then softly she said, "Why are you here?" His voice cracked. "Because a stranger made me see what I'd become." He knelt beside her, eyes wet, and for the first time he said what she needed to hear, not as a proud man, but as a broken one. "I'm sorry." And in that silence, beneath the rustling of the prairie grass, something shifted. Forgiveness didn't come easy, but it started there, in a barn where pain met repentance, and where a stranger's courage restored what shame had destroyed. As the story spread across Redwood, people began to see differently. They whispered less and listened more. Some said the stranger was an angel. Others swore he was a passing cowboy with a haunted past. But to the girl and the man who had lost his way, he was a lesson, a reminder that no sin is too heavy for mercy, and no heart too cold for change. And to all who heard it, the message was clear. Never judge a story until you've walked through the dust it came from. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something deep inside, then make sure to subscribe and join us for more powerful Wild West stories that touch the heart, teach a lesson, and remind us that even in a cruel world, kindness still rides tall.